The room was quiet, two chairs facing each other, soft lighting designed to feel intimate, confessional. No studio audience to react, no co-hosts to intervene. Just Morgan Freeman and Savannah Guthrie, separated by 3 ft of carefully arranged space and decades of assumptions about who each of them really was. The Today Show had promoted this as a rare, in-depth conversation with a living legend. What the producers didn't know was that their host had prepared questions designed to break that legend apart piece by piece. And what Savannah Guthrie didn't know was that the man with the voice of God had been surviving longer than she had been alive. And he wasn't about to stop. Now, subscribe and drop a comment, because what happens next will redefine what you think you know about Morgan Freeman. The converted brownstone studio had been dressed to feel like a living room. Bookshelves lined the walls. Warm light filtered through gauze curtains. Morgan Freeman settled into his chair with the unhurried grace of a man who had learned that rushing was for people who hadn't yet figured out how short life really was. At 87 years old, he carried himself with a dignity that seemed almost from another era. This was a man whose voice had narrated the universe for millions, who had played God so convincingly that audiences half believed it, who had spent the first 50 years of his life being told he wasn't leading man material, and the next 37 proving everyone wrong. He had survived poverty in Mississippi, the slow grind of an acting career that went nowhere for decades, and the brutal microscope of fame that came when he finally broke through. Savannah Guthrie took her seat across from him, her posture perfect, her smile professionally warm. At 52, she was at the height of her influence, the face of morning television, a woman who had built a reputation for tough but fair journalism. But today, there was something different in her preparation, something sharper. She had decided that this interview was going to be the one that cut through Morgan Freeman's carefully maintained image. "Morgan, thank you for being here." Savannah began, her voice carrying the practiced intimacy of someone who had done thousands of these conversations. "It's such a privilege to have this time with you. Thank you for having me," Morgan replied. His voice, that familiar rumble that seemed to come from somewhere deeper than most human voices reached. "It's a nice room. Feels almost like being in someone's home." "That's the idea," Savannah said with a smile. "We wanted this to feel like a real conversation. No distractions, just two people talking. Honestly, Morgan repeated. And there was something in the way he said it that suggested he knew what was coming. "That's always the best policy," Savannah nodded, then shifted slightly in her chair, and the atmosphere changed. "Morgan, I want to start with something that I think has been on a lot of people's minds. In 2018, multiple women came forward with accusations of sexual harassment and inappropriate behavior against you. You issued an apology, but you also said your actions were misinterpreted. Looking back now, several years later, do you still stand by that characterization?" The question hung in the quiet room. Morgan's expression didn't change, but something settled behind his eyes. A weariness that suggested he had known this moment was coming. "I've addressed this before, Savannah, multiple times. I apologize to anyone who felt uncomfortable because of something I said or did. That apology was sincere, and it remains sincere. But I also maintain that my intentions were never to harass or harm anyone. But intentions don't always matter, do they?" Savannah pressed. "The impact on those women was real regardless of what you intended." "I understand that," Morgan said quietly. "And I've thought about it a great deal. The world changed. What was acceptable in one era became unacceptable in another. I'm not using that as an excuse. I'm simply acknowledging the complexity of the situation. Some would say that's not much of an acknowledgement, that you're minimizing what happened by framing it as a generational misunderstanding." Morgan was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was careful, measured. "I've been in this business for over 60 years. I've worked with thousands of people, and in all that time, my goal has always been to create a comfortable, creative environment. If I failed in that goal with some individuals, I am genuinely sorry. But I'm not going to sit here and accept a characterization of myself as a predator. That's not who I am. That's not who I've ever been." Savannah leaned forward slightly. "But how do we know that, Morgan? How do we know who anyone really is behind closed doors? You've built this image as this wise grandfatherly figure, the voice of God, the narrator of our collective conscience. But maybe that image has protected you from scrutiny that others would have faced." The accusation was sharp. And for the first time, something flickered in Morgan's eyes that might have been anger. protected me. I grew up black in Mississippi in the 1940s. I was told I couldn't be a leading man in Hollywood because of my skin color. I didn't achieve any real success until I was 50 years old. 50. I've been scrutinized my entire life, Savannah. The idea that I've somehow been protected is not just wrong. It's insulting to everything I've lived through. But you have to admit that your status has given you a certain shield. When those accusations came out, there was outrage for a few weeks and then it largely faded. You continued working. You continued being celebrated. Do you think that would have happened to someone with less cultural capital? I don't know, Morgan said honestly. I can only speak to my own experience. I know that I cooperated with every investigation. I know that no charges were ever filed. I know that I've tried to learn from the situation and be more aware of how my words and actions might be perceived. Beyond that, I can't control what the world decides to do with my story. Savannah shifted tactics. Let's talk about something else that has followed you for years. The reports about your relationship with your step-granddaughter, Adina Hinz, who was tragically murdered in 2015. There were tabloid stories suggesting the relationship was inappropriate. You've denied those reports, but can you understand why people found them troubling? Morgan's face changed. Completely, the professional composure cracked, revealing something raw beneath. You're asking me about Adina. His voice was quiet but carried a tremor. A young woman I helped raise who was killed in the most brutal way imaginable. And you want to ask me about tabloid rumors? I'm asking because it's part of your public narrative, whether you want it to be or not. Morgan's voice was firm. Now I'm not going to do this. Adina was my family. I loved her. I grieved for her. And the rumors you're referring to were lies spread by people trying to sensationalize a tragedy for clicks and sales. I will not dignify them with a response beyond that. But don't you think the public deserves nothing when it comes to my grief? Morgan cut her off and there was ice in his voice. Now Adina is gone. Her killer is in prison. And every time someone brings up those disgusting rumors, they desecrate her memory all over again. I expected better from you, Savannah. I really did. The rebuke landed hard. Savannah paused, seemed to reconsider her approach, then pressed on. Let's talk about your views on race in America. You've been controversial on this subject. You once told Mike Wallace that the way to end racism was to stop talking about it. You've said you oppose Black History Month because it relegates Black history to a single month. Some in the Black community have found those views problematic. Do you still hold them? Morgan took a breath, visibly collecting himself after the previous exchange. What I've always said is that I don't want to be defined by my race any more than I want to be defined by my height or the color of my eyes. I want to be judged by my work, by my character, by what I contribute to the world. That's not a rejection of Black identity. It's an embrace of full humanity. But some would argue that in a country with America's history, ignoring race is a form of privilege. That only someone who has achieved your level of success can afford to say, "Stop talking about race." Would they? Morgan's eyebrow raised. I grew up in Jim Crow, Mississippi. I drank from colored fountains. I sat in the back of buses. I watched my community terrorized by men in white hoods. Don't you dare suggest that I don't understand racism because I've achieved success. My success came despite racism, not because I was protected from it. His voice was rising, and in the intimate space of the room, it filled every corner. I've survived this history, and I've earned the right to have my own perspective on how to move forward. If some people disagree with my approach, that's fine. But I won't be lectured on racism by people who learned about it from books while I was living it. Savannah seemed momentarily taken aback by the force of his response. But she recovered. You've played God in multiple films. Some critics have suggested there's an irony there or even an ego in repeatedly accepting roles as the divine. What do you say to that? Morgan laughed, but it was a tired sound. So now we're criticizing my casting. I've played prisoners, drivers, detectives, presidents, and yes, God. I take roles that interest me, that pay my bills, that give me something meaningful to do. The fact that filmmakers keep asking me to play God says something about how they see me, not about how I see myself. But you have to admit you've cultivated a certain image, the wise sage, the moral authority, the voice that explains the universe. Isn't that itself a kind of performance? A character you've created. All public personas are performances to some degree. Morgan acknowledged. But the core of who I am, my values, my beliefs, the way I try to treat people, that's real. I'm not performing wisdom. I'm simply sharing what I've learned in 87 years of living. If that comes across as sagely, so be it. He looked at Savannah with an expression that mixed disappointment and understanding. I came here expecting a conversation, an actual exchange of ideas between two people. Instead, you've come armed with accusations, controversies, and attempts to deconstruct an image you've decided is false. That's not journalism, Savannah. That's demolition. I'm asking tough questions. That's my job. Your job is to inform and illuminate. What you've been doing for the past 20 minutes is attempting to destroy. There's a difference. He shifted in his chair, and for the first time he looked genuinely tired. I've been famous for about 35 years. Before that, I was a struggling actor for almost as long. I've seen how this business works. How the media builds people up so they can tear them down. How yesterday's hero becomes tomorrow's villain because someone decided it was time for a new narrative. His voice dropped to something more personal. But here's what you don't seem to understand. I'm 87 years old. I've buried friends, colleagues, people I loved. I faced my own mortality more times than I can count. Your questions don't scare me, Savannah. Your implications don't wound me. I've been through too much to be undone by an interview. Savannah tried to regain control. I'm not trying to undo you, Morgan. I'm trying to get at the truth. Whose truth? Morgan asked. The truth the tabloid sold. The truth that makes for good ratings. Because my truth is sitting right here in front of you, and you haven't asked a single question designed to actually understand it. He gestured around the room. You created this intimate setting to make me comfortable, to get me to let my guard down. But what you actually wanted was vulnerability you could exploit, confessions you could clip and share, moments of weakness that would generate headlines. He shook his head slowly. I've spent my entire career telling stories. I know how narrative works. I know what you're trying to construct here, and I won't be the raw material for your demolition project. That's not what this is, Savannah protested. Isn't it? You started with accusations of harassment. You moved to tabloid rumors about a murdered family member. You questioned my views on race. You suggested my public image is fraudulent. At what point were you planning to ask about my craft, my 60 years of work, what I've learned about acting, about life, about human nature? He stood up slowly, and even at 87 there was something commanding about his presence. I've done over 100 films. I've worked with directors from Clint Eastwood to Christopher Nolan. I've played everything from a pimp to a president. I've narrated documentaries about the universe itself. There's a lifetime of experience sitting in front of you, and you've wasted it on gossip and gotcha questions. He paused, something shifting in his voice to something more reflective. You know what I've learned about acting in 60 years? It's about truth. Finding the truth of a character, the truth of a moment, the truth of human experience. Every great performance I've ever given came from going deeper into honesty, not away from it. The Shawshank Redemption worked because we believed Red. We believed his hope and his fear and his friendship with Andy. That wasn't tricks. That was truth. His eyes seemed to focus on something far away, driving Miss Daisy. People thought it was a simple movie about a driver and an old woman, but it was about dignity, about two people from different worlds learning to see each other's humanity. I've spent my career trying to illuminate those connections. The moments when people transcend their differences and recognize each other. He looked back at Savannah with disappointment. And here we are in this room designed to create connection. And all you've done is try to separate me from my own humanity, to reduce me to accusations and rumors and controversies. That's the opposite of what my work has always been about. He looked down at Savannah, who remained in her chair, suddenly looking smaller than she had at the start of the interview. Let me tell you something about my life that you didn't bother to research. I grew up in poverty, so deep we sometimes didn't know where the next meal was coming from. I was raised by my grandmother in Tennessee while my parents looked for work. I bounced between towns, between schools, between anyone who would take me in. I joined the Air Force because it was the only way out of Mississippi. I spent years doing dinner theater and off-Broadway and soap operas because nobody in Hollywood would give me a chance. His voice carried decades of struggle. Do you know what it's like to be told year after year that you're not right for the part? That your face doesn't fit? That maybe you should consider another line of work? I heard that for 20 years. 20 years of rejection. 20 years of wondering if everyone was right and I was wrong to keep trying. He shook his head slowly at the memory. I drove a cab to pay my rent. I worked as a transcriber. I did children's television because that's what was available to a black actor in the 1970s. Easy reader on the electric company. Not exactly the path to stardom, but I showed up every day. I did the work because that's all I knew how to do. I was 50 years old when I got my first Oscar nomination. 50. Most actors are considered finished by that age. I was just getting started. And everything that's come since. Every role, every award, every opportunity, I've earned through persistence and craft and refusing to give up when the world told me I wasn't good enough. He straightened his sweater with quiet dignity. That's who I am, Savannah. Not the caricature you've been trying to expose, not the villain you seem to want me to be. Just a man who has worked harder and longer than most people can imagine, who has made mistakes like everyone else, and who has tried to use his gifts to illuminate something true about human experience. He began walking toward the door, then stopped and turned back. I want to say something to whoever's watching this. Don't let anyone reduce your life to its worst moments or its most sensational rumors. You are more than the stories others tell about you. You are the sum of your choices, your struggles, your triumphs, and yes, your failures. But you are the one who gets to tell that story, not the tabloids, not the interviewers with agendas. He looked at Savannah one final time. I hope you'll think about what happened here today, not as a professional setback, but as a human lesson. Every person who sits across from you has lived a life you can barely imagine. They deserve curiosity, not prosecution. Understanding, not ambush. His voice softened to something almost kind. You're talented, Savannah. You have a platform that reaches millions. You could use it to illuminate, to connect, to help people understand each other. Instead, you've chosen to use it like a weapon. That's your choice, but it's a sad one. And with that, Morgan Freeman walked out of the room, leaving Savannah Guthrie sitting alone in the carefully designed set that now felt like the scene of something that had gone terribly wrong. The cameras continued rolling for a few moments, capturing her expression as it cycled through surprise, defensiveness, and finally something that might have been shame. She had come prepared to deconstruct a legend. Instead, she had been reminded that legends become legends for reasons that survive any single interview. In homes across America, viewers who had tuned in expecting a pleasant conversation with a beloved actor had witnessed something far more significant. They had seen a man at the end of his career demonstrate the same quality that had defined its beginning, an unshakable sense of his own worth and a refusal to let anyone diminish it. The interview would be discussed for weeks afterward. Some would defend Savannah, arguing that journalists had a responsibility to ask difficult questions of powerful figures, but many more would point to the intimate setting, the personal nature of the attacks, the decision to lead with accusations rather than understanding. It had felt less like journalism and more like an execution. For Savannah Guthrie, it would become a cautionary tale about the difference between tough questions and cruel ones, about the importance of approaching every subject with at least a measure of good faith, about the danger of treating an interview as a prosecution rather than a conversation. And for Morgan Freeman, it would become yet another chapter in a story that had always been about endurance, about surviving when others wanted you to fail, about maintaining dignity in a world that often rewarded its opposite. That was the real Morgan Freeman, not the voice of God, though he had played. That part, not the wise narrator, though he had been that, too. Just a man from Mississippi who had spent 87 years learning how to survive and who had one more lesson to teach. That dignity once earned doesn't have to be surrendered to anyone. Not to tabloids, not to trending topics. Not to interviewers who had decided before the cameras rolled that they already knew the whole story. What do you think about this incredible confrontation? Was Savannah Guthrie out of line, or was she just doing her job? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, and make sure to subscribe for more stories that will absolutely leave you speechless.